What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Appreciate you joining me today. One of my favorite episodes every year, my final 53-man roster projection. To me, this year was harder than I think any other year I can possibly remember because there's some injury stuff that is a little bit tough to navigate. It's really difficult to suss out exactly what's going to happen at wide receiver. That number 3 running back position is really interesting. You had Rashid Walker play in the last game and play very, very well, which makes that spot sort of up in the air. You had all of the edge rushers that didn't really do much in the last preseason game to go earn their spot. You had all of them have different flashes throughout different periods of training camp and preseason. You had Tipa out of the last game, and we don't know why. So, was he held out due to injury? Was he held out due to not wanting to get him hurt because he had already made the team? We don't know that. You have Dallin Leavitt hanging out there that, is probably going to end up on IR, and then they're going to have to cut somebody and probably bring somebody back. There could be trades. There is a lot to this. And I think there's some really interesting decisions with some of the 7th round picks, Rashid Walker, Samori Toure, Tariq Carpenter, amongst others. So I found this one, quite frankly, to be, I think, the toughest one that I can possibly remember. I could have gone in so many different directions, and there's about maybe 10 guys, 10, 12 guys that I could have said yes, no, and then flipped my mind 2 seconds later. So I spent a lot of time marinating on this, going through special team snaps and reviewing some special teams tape and just kind of reviewing everything that I possibly could to try to put this together. I'm fairly confident I'm going to get at least probably 3 or 4 of these wrong. But I basically went with, sort of what Brian Gutekunst has been saying. And I did a whole episode on this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this at length. But he's been very adamant that this is now a 69-man roster. You get 53 guys on the active, you get 16 guys on the practice squad, and you can call up players every single week. And everybody can be called up at least 3 times. And, if you need to, add to your roster an extra running back or an extra edge rusher, an extra safety, things like that. At corner, same thing. You can add a couple of those guys to the 53, by calling them up from the practice squad. And I think that they're really going to look at that as an avenue that they're going to use aggressively. And I think this is really going to get to the 53 players that they don't want to risk losing. And I know I talked about that at length in another episode. If you haven't checked that out, make sure to do so. But this is the group that I kept because I think they didn't want to lose any of these guys to waivers or potentially have any other team pick them up, claim them, etc. So may not be exactly as even as a lot of people would like, with maybe, for example, I'm only going to have 2 running backs on the team. I'll touch base on that more in just a moment. Only 4 edge rushers. So there's going to be some positions that probably need to be added to on game day, but I don't think that's a major issue. And I think they're going to use that call up aggressively from the practice squad when they need it. So here is my 53-man roster as of, end of day Tuesday, right? I have a feeling that there could, like I said, Dallin Leavitt's going to get probably cut and then added back to IR, which we'll talk about more. They could claim a player here or there. They could trade a player. And I'm not going to predict they're going to trade X player to Y team. Once you get into that, it's impossible to predict, right? So assuming there's no trades, this is what I think it's going to look like. Quarterback, clearly very easy. I know there was at the end, just a little bit of scuttlebutt of could they keep a third quarterback? And Etling's at least a little bit interesting in the fact that he could play some special teams and maybe even have a little bit of an H-back role if they really wanted him to, if you wanted to make him active on game day. But let's be real. They're not keeping 3 quarterbacks. They're not keeping 3 quarterbacks active on game day. That's just an impossibility. So while it's a unique decision, I think they'll be very happy to get Etling back on the practice squad. Cannot imagine that anyone would claim Danny Etling at this point. So I think they're going to be safe in that. Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, lead pipe locks to make the team. And then I'm going to have Danny Etling on the practice squad. And I'll go through my whole 16-man practice squad projection at the end as well. But Rodgers and Love at quarterback. Running back, as I already spoiled earlier, I've been talking about this for 2 months now, and I know there's a lot of other people that have, sort of jumped on the bandwagon, but to me, the 2 running backs just makes a lot of sense. And I will be very clear here. I had up until 5 minutes before recording this, I had Tyler Goodson on this list. It was my last toughest decision. I'm very close to wanting to keep Tyler Goodson. If they kept him, I would get it. I like him a lot as a player. I just think when you look at the overall state of the roster, like I know I've had a couple people in comments are like, "Are you sure Kylan Hill?" Yes, I'm very, very sure that Kylan Hill is that good. He is at minimum a number 2 running back in this league. Who knows how he comes back from injury? That is going to be something that we have to wait and see on. But just based on who he was prior to injury, he was easily, in my opinion, a number 2 running back, and at worst, a very, 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 very good number 3 running back, and better than Tyler Goodson. So at some point, even if you keep Tyler Goodson on the roster now, when Kylan Hill gets healthy, I just don't think they're keeping 4 running backs on this roster. So then you're going to have to subject Tyler Goodson to waivers later. I think you just try it now when everyone else is getting waived and add him on the practice squad, and hope for the best. Hope that he doesn't get claimed, and hope you can get him back on. As I've talked about before, every team has some running back on their roster right now that they're hoping that they get to keep, and all of them are probably going to get them back on the practice squad. Like I said, I like Goodson, but he is just a hair off for me as to making this 53-man roster. So I'm going Jones and Dillon, and then I think Tyler Goodson or Patrick Taylor, I think both of those guys will get call-ups from the practice squad until Kylan Hill is ready and he actually gets a roster spot as the 3rd running back on this team. So that's where I'm going right now. Jones and Dillon, just 2 running backs on the roster. Wide receiver. I can't believe it. I never would have expected it, but I am keeping 8 wide receivers on this initial roster. Alan Lazard, Sammy Watkins, Randall Cobb, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Amari Rogers, Samori Toure, and Juwan Winfrey. The 2 here that are of question are Toure and Winfrey. I don't think anyone else is going anywhere. Maybe they would take calls or make calls about Amari Rogers to see if maybe there's another 3rd or 4th round cornerback that maybe is he still looks pretty good, but maybe another team has way too many corners, and Green Bay could use a number 6 corner, and another team could use a number 6 wide receiver, and it just the math adds up where they were both drafted in similar spots, and Green Bay sends Amari to the other team, and they get in this new corner that was taken in the 3rd or 4th round a year or 2 ago. I think that's at least within the realm of possibility where they could try to do something like that, because you look at this and Samori Toure is not going to have any trade value. Some team might claim him. I think that's legitimately a chance if he were to get released, because I think he's put good enough tape out there, but he's not, I don't think he's going to have trade value. If it is, it's insanely minimal. And I don't see that at all. Juwan Winfrey, I don't think is going to have trade value. You're not trading Doubs or Watson. Cobb, Watkins, and Lazard are all going to be back. So Amari would be the one that if they were able to actually trade someone, maybe he would have some trade value. The issue with that is we finally have seen some flashes out of Amari Rogers. They drafted him and moved up to get him in the 3rd round just a year ago, and GMs are not in the business of taking pennies on the dollar for a player that they just drafted with a premium top 100 selection that they moved up for just a year ago and is actually starting to show some flashes. So I don't see him going anywhere. And then it just becomes really tough math or really tough decisions, right? I just don't think after the entire, Jake Kumerow situation where Rodgers praised Kumerow and praised Kumerow and praised Kumerow, and then they released him and he gets claimed by the Bills. I don't think that Rodgers can praise Winfrey, and then they cut him, and then he goes and gets claimed by another team. I just don't think they can do that. I think he has to be on the roster because the optics for that would be terrible, and I just don't think he can do it. Maybe if he's incredibly just has a belief amongst all belief, incredibly confident that he can get Winfrey back in the practice squad, maybe he could do it, but he better be very confident that he can get Winfrey back in the practice squad, because otherwise I think Rodgers is going to be extremely unhappy. And I just have seen too much out of Samori Toure. He's been, quite frankly, one of their biggest playmakers so far. He had the huge catch against the Saints at the end of practice for the game-winning touchdown. He had the big play on family night. He's just made some very consistent plays. I thought he had a great 3rd preseason game. I wouldn't subject him to waivers. I think there's too much upside there. So I think you keep all 8. And I think this is a situation where you don't need any wide receivers on the practice squad. You keep 8. You pad the practice squad in other positions that are going to need it for call-ups. You're probably deactivating Winfrey and Toure on most game days, maybe even Amari Rogers on some game days to get players up on defense if you need them. But I don't think they're going to want to release any of these 8. They probably will. If I were a betting man right now, I would probably bet you that they only keep 7. Maybe they only keep 6. Who knows? But if this is my prediction, and I'm going with 8, so that's where we're at right now. I understand wanting to keep less than that. I don't like keeping 8 wide receivers. I think that's not exactly where you want to be from a roster standpoint, but I do think they're going to keep their best 53 that they don't want to subject to waivers or having another team pick them up. And I think if that's the case, I think they're going to keep all 8 of these wide receivers unless they can work out some trade that makes sense for both teams. Tight end, Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis, Josiah DeGuara, and Tyler Davis. Yes, I do think Tyler Davis makes it. I do think he has enough special teams prowess or whatever. I think he's built up enough on special teams to make this roster. And I just think let's say, for instance, that, Robert Tonyan isn't ready to go week 1. Who are you putting out there at tight end? Josiah DeGuara is not a true tight end. You can't play Mercedes Lewis the whole game. First of all, he can only play 30 snaps a game at most, and he's just a blocker. He can't catch passes for the most part. So unless they're trading for somebody at tight end, and maybe you could work out an Amari Rodgers for a tight end, a mediocre tight end sort of trade. Maybe that's within the realm of possibility. But if not, I think you have to keep Tyler Davis. I don't think Sal Canella's ready. I don't think any of the other tight ends are ready. So I just think that has to basically be Tyler Davis by default. And I don't think, even if Tonyan is ready week 1, right? I don't think you want to play him 70 snaps in week 1. So I think you're just going to need to supplement that a little bit. And I think that's going to have to be Tyler Davis until they can maybe find somebody else to take that spot. So Tonyan, Lewis, DeGuara, and Tyler Davis, my 4 tight ends. I'm going to start with center and guard first on the offensive line. Center, Josh Myers and Jake Hansen, and Jake Hansen's a guard too, but those are my centers. Guard, John Runyon Jr., Royce Newman, Zach Tom, and Sean Ryan. I think those are all 6 very easy keeps. I don't see any of those guys going anywhere. Like I said, I think Royce Newman's a 99.8%. There's a 0.02 that maybe something could happen with him, but they're not cutting a 3rd round pick in Sean Ryan. They're clearly not cutting Zach Tom. Jake Hansen's been one of their standouts, is, competing for a starting spot. John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers. I just don't think, when I say standout for Jake Hansen, by the way, I mean most improved. I don't mean he's one of their top players. So just to be clear before I get a bunch of comments on that, but I just don't see any of those guys anywhere. So I think those 6 are easy: JRJ, Myers, Newman, Hansen, Tom, and Ryan. Then you've got Bakhtiari and Jenkins. I don't think it's incredibly out of the realm of possibility. I wish I could have attended the presser on Saturday because I would have asked this. I don't think it's entirely out of the realm of possibility that they could put, if David Bakhtiari isn't quite ready yet, and even if that, I think they could have maybe even known this ahead of time, that they take him off a pup, let him practice for a while, see how his body responds, and then keep him on the 53, and then immediately put him on IR the next day to keep him out and then bring him back at some point. Not saying it will happen, not predicting it will happen, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. And the reason why they would potentially do that is, I know it would have been, you could easily make the argument, well, Andy, they should have just kept him on pup then, and then they would have made the roster gymnastics a little bit easier. Understandable, but like I said earlier, at some point you just need to get David Bakhtiari out there and practicing and seeing how his body responds. And if he was at that point, you take him off pup and you figure out the rest later. So now, and again, I'm not saying this, I'm not predicting this, I don't know anything, but all of a sudden, if maybe his body wasn't quite ready or didn't respond as 100% the way they were expecting, maybe you put him, on the active roster so that he can be brought back from IR, but then put him on IR the next day with the ability to bring him back at some point. Don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's the direction that they'll go, but just something to keep an eye on and throw out there in the ether. I'm not throwing it out there in the ether to hope that it happens. I hope he's ready to go and his body's responding phenomenally, but just as a reminder that they could do something like that. Also, so Bakhtiari, Elton Jenkins, Yosh Nijman, clearly, and I kept both Rasheed Walker and Caleb Jones. And this is just another one of those situations of keeping the best 53 players. I know that Green Bay has been very, very good at developing offensive linemen and, finding them in the later rounds or undrafted guys like Yosh Nijman and plugging and playing them and having success. I get that. But it is not a good idea to find talented offensive linemen and let them go for nothing. And I think they found 2 talented players in Rasheed Walker and Caleb Jones. And if I were Green Bay, I would not want to test the waters to see if another team would potentially claim either of them. There are a lot of bad teams out there that are not competing for anything this year and have nothing better to do than to take a look at guys exactly like Rasheed Walker and Caleb Jones. I think it's going to be very tough for them to keep 11 offensive linemen. And if you look at this offense that I put on paper here, that is 27 players on offense. You add 3 to special teams, which we'll talk about in a second. That leaves only 23 for defense. That is normally, like, you want to be like 25, 25, maybe 26, 24, but 27, 23 is very tough. So I get that keeping 8 wide receivers, 4 tight ends, and 11 offensive linemen is not ideal. I think you're helping yourself a little bit by only keeping 2 running backs and 2 quarterbacks, but I understand why this, logistically may be a little bit tough. But again, I think you keep the best 53 players that you want to keep this year and long term, and you supplement guys off the practice squad as needed. And I just think that's the best way to go. I think the players that will ultimately get released, I don't think there's anyone that you're ultimately super concerned about losing. Even if they get claimed off waivers, I think you can find a very similar player off of another practice squad if you need it, or even add another guy to your practice squad that got released this week and not have a major differential. So I want to keep both Rasheed Walker and Caleb Jones. It's going to be tough, but this is my 53, darn it, and I'm going to keep both of them in my prediction here. So just to recap really quick, the offense: Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, Lazard, Watkins, Cobb, Watson, Dobbs, Rodgers, Toure, and Winfrey at wide receiver. Tight ends: Tunyon, Lewis, DeGuara, and Davis. Tackles: Bakhtiari, Jenkins, Nyman, Walker, and Jones. Guards: JRJ, Newman, Tom, and Ryan. And centers: Myers and Hansen. So those are my offensive players, which doesn't leave a ton of spots for defense. Let's just cover special teams really quick. I'm going to say Mason Crosby gets taken off a PUP and added to the active roster at kicker. Pat O'Donnell at punter, and then Jack Coco at center. Clearly, if Mason Crosby isn't ready to go, he will just stay on the PUP list, and then they will add keep Ramiz Ahmed, and there's not a change there with any other position. So that's a possibility, but I'm going to say Crosby gets taken off a PUP, and then O'Donnell and Coco are all kept. I do think Coco will make the team. They could, maybe add a long snapper that's waived, but there's not many teams that have 2 long snappers. I think there's only 2 or 3. So I'm going to say that they stick with Coco for now and see how he does through the course of the first part of the season. All right, defenders. Defensive line, there were 2 really hard cuts for me. The first one was Tyler Goodson. The second one was Jack Heflin. I wanted everything in my power to keep Jack Heflin because I think he's earned it. But I just think 6 defensive linemen on this defense, that 6 defensive linemen isn't going to play much. And to be fair, Clark, Reed, Lowry, and Slayton are going to play a ton. And any leftover snaps you probably want Devontae Wyatt to get just so he gets some playing time. So I just don't think there's going to be snaps there for a 6 defensive lineman. And I think they're going to lean on the belief that Heflin will not get claimed, which I think is right. And I think they will also lean on the fact that if Heflin does get claimed, Heflin and Jonathan Ford aren't going to get claimed. And Ford showed at least a couple flashes to me in training camp that he could be somebody that develops long term and could also be a 6 defensive lineman option and play some snaps here and there. So I think they're going to know that they're going to at least get one of those guys back between Jonathan Ford and Jack Heflin. And Chris Slayton's another one. Sorry, I want to talk about him too. I think the fact that they have 3 of those type of guys, right? Slayton, Heflin, and Jonathan Ford, that I think they're going to feel confident they can get all 3 back, but I guarantee you they're going to feel great that they're going to get at least 2 of those guys back. And if you've got 5 defensive linemen that are really good, that are already making the 53, and then you've got, like, even if Heflin gets claimed, right, you've still got Chris Slayton and Jonathan Ford on your practice squad, they're going to feel just fine. So really, really tough to keep, Heflin off the 53. He earned it. He deserves it, but sometimes deserve and earn, unfortunately, don't have everything to do with it. And you keep the guys with the highest upside. And I just think that's what may come down to here. So would love to see Heflin on the roster. Like I said, definitely earned it, definitely deserves it. But for this one, I'm going with just 5 defensive linemen. Edge rusher, really, really, really difficult to break down. As I talked about before, all of these edge rushers have had flashes at different times. All of them have had different flashes on special teams. I went with 4 edge rushers only here. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Kingsley Enagbare, and Tipa Naliai. I think those are the 4 that you keep. I think Tipa's been the most consistent of the 4 throughout camp and going back to the end of last year. And then I think he also brings the best special teams value of the 4. So those are the 4 that I'm keeping. And I think this is another spot where Green Bay is going to feel like we feel fairly confident that we are going to get Garvin, Hamilton, and Kobe Jones back on the practice squad. But at worst, maybe we lose one of those guys and we're still going to get 2 of the other ones back. So I think Green Bay is going to feel confident in that. And if they need to bring up a Garvin or a Hamilton or a Kobe Jones on game day from the practice squad, they can do it. I just don't think there's enough of a differentiator there where you feel like you've got to keep a 5th guy. And I think that they'll feel confident that they can add one of those guys from the practice squad, and that there's, even if one of them gets claimed, I don't think they're going to lose sleep over it. And they could look to like claim an edge rusher. They could look to sign a veteran. That's a possibility as well. I don't think all of those options are off the table because, quite frankly, out of Tipa, Garvin Hamilton, and Kobe Jones, none of them really went out and just dominated and claimed that spot. So that could be an area that they look to upgrade via waiver claim or just free agent addition. But I'm going to go for now Gary, Smith, Inigbare, and Tipa at edge. Inside linebacker, probably one of the more easy ones. Campbell, Quay, McDuffie, and Barnes, the 4. Listen, Ray Wilborn has had enough success on special teams that, like, if they tried to sneak him on, I wouldn't be shocked, but I'm talking like less than 5% chance, I think, at this point. I don't think Ty Summers really has any chance. So those are my 4, Campbell, Walker, McDuffie, and Barnes. Corner, same thing, only keeping 5 here. I just don't think there was a 6th corner that earned the spot. If it is, would lean heavily on Keandre Thomas. I don't think Rico Gafford is that guy. I don't think KB Anento was that guy. I think it would be Keandre Thomas as the 6th. Once again, I think they're going to feel very confident that they can get Rico Gafford and Keandre Thomas back on the practice squad. And even if they can only get one of them back, I think they'll feel fine. And even if they don't, they'll get KB Anento back. And the difference between the 3 is absolutely minuscule and is not going to change the course of your season one iota. So I think you keep 5, and then you look to supplement off the practice squad when you need it, knowing that you're probably going to get Keandre Thomas, Rico Gafford, KB Anento, at least 2 of those guys back on the practice squad. And then that leaves safety. The 5 that I kept at corner: Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Rasul Douglas, Shamar Jean-Charles, and Kayshawn Nixon, the 5 that I kept. Safety: Darnell Savage, Adrian Amos, Sean Davis, Tariq Carpenter, and Dallin Levitt. So a little bit of wonkiness here. Dallin Levitt will have to get kept on the 53. There's just no way they're releasing him without keeping him on the 53 at this point, because they would have done that at the 85, and then they would have done that at the 80 cut down. There's no reason to keep him through the first 2 cut downs and then cut him with an injury settlement now if you weren't going to do that before. So I think that they will release, or they'll keep him on the 53 and then release or put him on IR the next day with the intentions of bringing him back later in the season. And then at that point, I think they will bring back Micah Abernathy is my prediction there. So Micah Abernathy initially cut. I don't think he'll get claimed, and then they'll put Dallin Levitt on IR the next day and then bring Micah Abernathy back, assuming that he clears waivers, which I think that he will. So day 2 of the 53, I think, will be Savage, Amos, Davis, Carpenter, and Abernathy. Day 1 will have Levitt instead of Abernathy, with Abernathy having to get through waivers first. As mentioned, Crosby, O'Donnell, and Coco, the special teams players. So defensive line: Kenny Clark, Jerron Reed, Dean Lowry, TJ Slayton, and Devontae Wyatt. Edge: Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, Kingsley Inigbare, Tipa Naliai. Inside linebacker: Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, and Chris Barnes. Corner: Jair, Eric Stokes, Rasul Douglas, Shamar Jean-Charles, and Keyshawn Nixon. Safety: Savage, Amos, Sean Davis, Tariq Carpenter, and Dallin Levitt to begin with, and then Micah Abernathy. All right, practice squad: Danny Etling, Tyler Goodson, Patrick Taylor, Sal Cannella, Michael Manette, Jack Heflin, Chris Slayton, Jonathan Ford, Jonathan Garvin, Ladarius Hamilton, Kobe Jones, Ray Wilborn, Rico Gafford, Keandre Thomas, Devontae Cross, and Ramiz Ahmed. I do think Cross showed enough as a safety, and I think Ramiz Ahmed showed enough as a kicker to get on that list as well. So 16 practice squad guys. I think they'll try to keep as many of their own guys as possible. Maybe they add one new guy in there, but I think those would be the 16 that I would keep. The players that are released outright and not signed back: Dexter Williams, who I think has a decent chance of actually making the practice squad, but I'm going to go Dexter Williams right now. Travis Fulgham, Ishmael Hyman, Alize Mack. He just had that injury in the last game, so I'm going to say he ultimately gets released with an injury designation. Same thing with Nate Becker, who had a bit of an injury the last game. Same thing with Akil Byers, who had an injury, and hasn't played in a couple weeks. Ty Summers released. KB Anento released, and then Innis Gaines also had the hamstring injury again. I think he will get released with an injury designation as well. And then that leaves Kylan Hill on the PUP list. So that is my official 53-man roster prediction. I'm sure some of you will hate some of the decisions. You can be thankful that I am not the GM and Brian Gutekunst is. Very, very excited to see how they shape out this roster. Just remember that the first 53 is just that. It is very malleable throughout the season, and the last 53 will look light years different than that first 53, probably 16 to 20 guys different at the end of the year based off of injuries and changes and releases and claims and practice squad additions and everything else. So there will be a ton of changes throughout the course of the year. Don't get too caught up in the initial 53, but it's like I don't know. It's just one of those super fun things to do and go over and see how this Packers roster will round out on day one. So that's my official prediction. Hope you enjoyed it. I will be right back here tomorrow with Perry Goldstein. We'll have an all new episode for you. Make sure to check it out. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.